Hello, good evening. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have myself and Sam taking you through another Q&A session. So please, if you do have some questions, we'll drop them in the comments below, and we'll try and get round to as many as we can. Sometimes we can't get round to them. However, we will try our very best. How are you, Sam? Are you well?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, good stuff. We've got some sad news to bring you this evening. A good friend of ours, myself, Sam, everybody at NIC, EIC and Alexa, Tony Cable has sadly passed away, hence why I've got the moustache. It was something that he liked to rock. He basically, him and Darren, they were filming some stuff on Movember, and Darren tricked him, said that we're keeping the moustaches for Movember. Darren shaved his off and Tony kept his. That's what I've tried to resemble something that he had there. So it's got me a little bit, that has. Sad news that Tony K has passed away, industry legend. Please, and thank you to everybody that are sending their condolences to him and his family. He is a legend. Yes, Johnny, you're right. He's an absolute legend. Richard, yes, legend, true gentleman. All of that. For the people that didn't get to have the pleasure of meeting him, you missed out. He was a cracking guy. So, without further ado, we'll start looking at some questions. Let's have a little look what we got here then, Sam. So, evening to everybody. Do EICRs apply to B&Bs and holiday cottages?
Well, EICRs can still apply because they're electrical installations, but they don't come under the private rented sector. So the new legislation that kicked in this year was specifically, it's easy for you to say, specifically for the private rented sector. So that was tenants and landlords and not holiday lets. So yeah, you would still have to do an EICR in those other types of accommodation, but they don't come under the private rented sector scheme.
Okay. What else we got? What code for a boiler spur fuse inside bathroom, inside cupboard or outside? So there's two questions there. What code for a boiler having a fuse spur inside a bathroom, inside a cupboard or outside is the question.
Okay. Well, it's probably worth starting off with the cupboard situation. So you can use a cupboard to create an area which, although dimensionally should be inside the zones, so i.e. it might be less than 600 mil away from the edge of the bath or shower, you can use the cupboard to create fixed partitions, which means then that inside the cupboard might be outside of the zones. So if we're talking about something that's outside of the zones and doesn't need the IP rating requirements, then you wouldn't say it's non-compliant. You'd still need to consider general regs, and general regs would talk about things being suitable for the environment that it's installed in. So you might want to safely isolate and open up to see if there's any moisture ingress that might have incurred from condensation and moisture as well as splashing. But basically, a cupboard could be used to create an area that, although dimensionally is inside the zones, within that cupboard it might create an area which is outside of the zone. So that might lessen the requirements in terms of IP rating, etc. Ultimately, if it requires the IP rating to comply with Section 701, and it's clearly not there because you've used a standard switched fuse spur, then you're definitely looking at a C3 in that it's non-compliant because it hasn't got the right IP rating. It's got a switch if it is a switched spur, because we're not allowed switches in Zone 2. So you'd be definitely looking at a C3, and then on further inspection, if there was signs of water ingress, you'd have to consider a C2. So, bit of a roundabout way to answer the question, but so think about whether it's in the zones or not. If it's out of the zones because of the fabrication of the cupboard, then you've still got to consider general regs and think about, is it suitable? So look at it, open it up. Is it suffering from moisture and condensation? Because you still might want to consider a classification code.
Mm-hmm.
If it is within the zones and it's not got the right IP rating, definitely a C3. But then look in it to see if there are any signs of ingress, which would then lead you to consider a C2.
Okay. Ben's asked, any news on extending the EICRs in the PRS from April 2021? I still haven't seen anything. I don't know if you've managed to get any more information, Sam?
No, still not. I mean, everything's changed again now with the news on Saturday. But yeah, we still haven't seen that they're putting that date back. So at the moment, we're still working on the basis that from the 1st of April, it will include existing tenants. So at the moment, the legislation only covers new tenants. And of course, that only accounts for a much smaller percentage of the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're still envisaging at the moment that come the 1st of April next year, it will also include existing tenants.
Okay, somebody's asked the question here, Sam, of saying, what's the most popular tech support questions that you're dealing with at the minute?
We are still getting a lot of coding questions based around the PRS, and you know, there's been a huge increase in the number of EICRs in that private rented sector being undertaken. We still get a fair few around vehicle charging because, again, it seems to be another growing market. So because it's growing, it sort of generates a lot of questions as well. But yeah, there's no real hot topic at the moment. We seem to periodically get a hot topic.
So the SPD questions have finally died down then.
Yeah, I think people are still there's still a few questions, you know, that people ask about if I'm doing a small addition to an existing installation, how far back do I have to go, etc. So those questions are still there, but not in as great a number as they first were when the 18th introduced the additional requirements.
Tony's son's actually jumped into the chat this evening. So hello, Dan. Sorry for your loss. And your dad, such a great guy. He's put here, rest in peace from AC from DC, because their initials were both AC and DC. So that's nice to see. A few people saying rest in peace as well. Lovely man, condolences to his family. Always recognised me at shows because we both supported the same football team. I was never a big fan of his choice in football team, but you know, someone's got to support him, I guess. That's Chelsea they're talking about, so someone's got to support him, I guess, Chris. And you and Tony happened to have that moment together when he was talking about Chelsea. That's nice to see as well. Is there any more questions, guys? Let's see some more questions. Sorry, I'll get my words straight again. What code? I can't read that. Would you code the fan that has a downlight, shower light, just above the shower? So, okay, so he's asking, Sam, does a fan that has a downlight inbuilt into the middle, just above the shower, does that need any coding afforded to it?
Well, if it's in the zone and it's not got the correct IP rating, so if it's low enough to be actually within zone 1, so we're talking about directly above the shower tray or bath, then it should be IPX4, and if it's not, you've got to certainly consider a C3 in that it's non-compliant with current regs, and then do some further investigation to actually see, as well as being non-compliant, if it's considered unsafe, and that would have to be done based on your estimation of how long it's there, and if it's showing any signs of water ingress. We are allowed luminaires in that location, even 230-volt luminaires, providing that they're RCD protected, providing that they're suitable for that environment, so they've got the right IP rating, and also manufacturer's instructions confirm that they're suitable for installation in that environment. So it would be a C3 if it's not got the right IP rating because it's non-compliant, and then over and above that, if there is any evidence of moisture or water ingress making it potentially unsafe, then we'd have to consider a C2.
So if the fan light was low voltage, there'd be no code afforded to it at all?
Low voltage again is permitted, but again you've got to check is it the right IP rating. So low voltage is good because that's a reduced risk, but we've still got to make sure that it's suitable for the environment. So it still needs to be IPX4 if it's in that zone 1, and if it's not, then you're looking at a C3 because it's non-compliant, and then you've also got to consider the moisture ingress because that could generate a fault which could create a hazard.
Okay. If you had tails in a wall less than 50 mil deep, I'm guessing you're saying, further than 3 meters, do you code this? If so, what code, and how would you rectify this if the customer wanted it done? Surface clipping trunking within the property. This would never be accepted by most customers.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. The first one is the tails buried in the wall at a depth of less than 50 mil. They would require additional protection in the form of either an RCD up front or mechanical protection to protect the tails against impact. People tend to design away from the RCD up front because obviously that creates a single point of failure, and if we lose that, we lose everything. So it's perhaps more common to take the approach of mechanical protection. So that could be, metal plate to install that in the wall. So you're giving it additional mechanical protection against impact.
Yeah.
So that's perhaps the most practical way of retrospectively making it compliant. Or you could consider, removing the tails and replacing them with something like SWA that's got the built-in armour in that could be earth. So again, you'd be compliant. So that's the 50 mil from the surface of the wall issue. If it's over 3 meters, you've also got the other issue that really, once we go beyond 3 meters, we should be providing those tails with our own form of overload protection and not relying solely on the cutout fuse. So again, once we go beyond 3 meters, if there's no evidence to say that the DNO's happy for you to have those extended tails protected against overload purely by the cutout service fuse, then you've got to look at a C3 and it's non-compliant. But if you can meet the ZS and you feel that you're in an environment where they're not likely to be mechanically damaged, then it would be suggested no worse than a C3, providing you've got adequate fault protection, because we're really talking about additional protection for the cable buried in the wall.
Okay. Next one then, what code if doing an EICR on a TT system and you cannot find the rod and can prove gas and water, and the last cable gives a good reading as if it is the rod? So I'm presuming he's seeing 3 lots of cables in the consumer unit. He's tested both of the other ones. He knows that this one's in particular the gas and water. He's got one last one there, but he's proven a good reading. Does he need to code it?
Yeah, you do need to definitely code it. So if you've done everything reasonably practical to try and discover the location, but you physically can't, typical one is it's buried under a patio that perhaps wasn't there when the house was first built. If you can verify through measurement and as much as possible through inspection that is the cable going to the rod, then if by measurement you can verify that the connection is good, and right now we've got a TT earth and then we've all got the right requirements, you'd leave it, or we would recommend that you'd leave it as a C3, in that it's safe for continued use, but it's non-compliant because, like all terminations, that rod should be available for future inspection and test, and also maintenance requirements. So it could certainly be improved to make it compliant, but if you can verify through inspection and through measurement that it's actually safe, i.e. it provides an adequate fault path to earth, then we would suggest nothing more than a C3. And the C3, the improvement would be to create a second earth rod that you can provide for future test and maintenance purposes. So now you're creating a new pit and cover so that it can be maintained in the future.
It'd definitely be something that you need to write on the certificate, just to make everybody aware, and write it in big letters everywhere that you've checked it, but you can't verify that that is the connection as well. On that new build house, consumer unit remote from external meter cabinet by about 15 meters, no switch fuse and fed in tails. How does this comply? Dum dum dum.
Yeah, so we go back very similar to the one where the tails were in the wall. If this one, if it is just the distance, so our big blue book tells us that we can omit overload protection where the DNO provides a device and agrees to us using it. Now, on a new build, they always will provide a device because they'll have a cutout fuse in the service head. But it's the agreement bit. The agreement, our experience is that they'll only agree to us using that service fuse if we stay within 2 or 3 meters. Mm-hmm. So again, it's a little bit difficult because records aren't always well kept. But if there's no evidence on the original installation certificate or elsewhere that the DNO have agreed to those extended tails, then we would suggest that that's, you've got no evidence of compliance. So again, you're looking at a C3 because of that. If you can confirm that it's safe for continued use, i.e. even with the extended length of tails, you can still meet the ZS of the cutout fuse, and there's no signs of damage to those extended tails, and based on your inspection of the installation and its use, you've got no belief that it's likely to be mechanically damaged, then we'd suggest just a C3. But if it was a long run and there were signs of the tails being exposed to damage, then you'd have to consider a C2.
It's just funny though, and you've got new build houses, you would expect them to be absolutely spot on, and yet we do seem to see this question crop up quite a few times. Someone else has replied, said, I've always asked myself the same question, and on how does it comply.
Yeah, unfortunately, quite often it's a miscommunication. You've got one contractor working for the DNO who's put in the service head and the branches in, and it's a completely separate contractor who's actually doing the installation within the properties, and perhaps the DNO one is in there first, and so he doesn't know where the consumer unit's going to go, makes an assumption and gets it wrong. So yeah, I think sometimes it can be a result of a miscommunication between the two, but then really it boils down to whoever was second would have to make sure that that they're being compliant, because if the first bit is already done, and that's more than likely going to be the DNO bit, then it really boils down to the contractor. Okay, he's now responsible for the installation. How is he going to make it compliant, even though he's got that extended run of tails?
Someone else has just put, I carry out EICRs on new builds and see this issue all the time as well. So it seems like it's a common occurrence. Maybe we could write this down and maybe do some sort of article on it and what the best solutions are as well. Someone else has asked, how would you code an SWA buried in the ground, not to the correct depth, e.g. in a garden under paving, grass, flower beds, etc.? Is there a measurement that we should be working to?
There's no measurement itself in the regs, although there's guidance in guidance notes and on-site guides of sort of 500 mil if we're going to areas that are unlikely to be disturbed, or 600 mil if you're going to areas that could be disturbed, such as flower borders. It's a very difficult one to give a definitive answer on, because you've got to take into consideration the likelihood of the cable being damaged and the age of which, how long has it been there without being damaged. So, for example, if it's going to be under a patio that's going to be there for some time, it's going to provide some durable protection, and you're not likely to accidentally put a spade or anything through that cable. So, again, it would be one of those ones where you've got to take a common sense approach and think, well, how likely is it to be damaged? Flower borders are difficult because, the first thing I would always suggest doing would be to speak to the homeowner and say, did you know there was a cable under there? Because if we didn't, then that's something that they should be aware of, because if they are putting spades in, if it's not known exactly how deep it is, but that you can see that there is a cable run, you could provide additional cable markers at sort of the ends to indicate to people, because the house may change hands, so the person currently might know, so you could improve it. But unless you've got signs of damage, either through inspection or measurement, then we'd suggest that you record it as a C3 if you can't confirm that it's at a depth. It would be very, very harsh to put it down as an FI unless you had some serious indication, either through inspection or measurement, that the cable had been damaged through impact. So it's a judgment call really on an install. On an install, we would always say, try to comply with those depths of 0.5 metre and 600 mil if we're going where it could be disturbed, like flower borders. But on an existing installation, I think it's one of those things where you record it as an operational limitation, because we're not supposed to be destructive. We're not suggesting that you need to dig down and inspect the cable along its length. That's not the job of an EIC.
No, definitely not. It's, like you say, we need to be mindful. And just touching on that as well, Sam, it's like you say, is how likely is that to actually happen? That's the question I would always ask is, yeah, it may be in a flower bed, but if it's 500 mil down, or it's a few, chances are the owner's probably going to know it's there, unless it's like you say, they've moved house, etc., and having an EICR carried out to ensure all safety. But yeah, that's a good question, Chris. So thank you for that one. Why are holiday lets not covered by the PRS EICR, so not legally required just because they are not specified tenancies? When will this loophole be picked up to stop dubious landlords changing tenancy to holiday lets to get out of an EICR? I don't think it will be picked up, and the simple fact that it won't be picked up is because within that tenancy agreement it would have to be over a certain period of time. I think the holiday let side of things, Sam, it would suggest that it's only for a week or a 2-week period.
Yeah, I mean, the legislation was brought in because of the condition of some of those long tenancy. Big generalisation, I know, but in general, the holiday lets are better maintained because you've got that throughput of people. And if somebody goes on holiday and sees that something's not working, they'll report it straight away. Whereas a tenant who wants to stay in there for 6 months is probably less likely to report it. Now, I appreciate that's a very, very big generalisation, but it's kind of where we think they're coming from. But yeah, the that the PRS legislation was specifically aimed at those poor landlords, of which unfortunately there are more about than there should be, and it was a niche within that rented property market that needed to be considered. So that's where it was focused at, because it's seen that the holiday thing is slightly different. There are different issues there, but in general they're better maintained and the issues are picked up more frequently.
Rick's asked the question, are NIC, EIC accepting new applications for membership given the current lockdown situations? I'm glad you've asked this, Rick, because this was going to be my sort of closing and finishing the stream for this evening. We have had some information from the people that sit above myself and Sam, and just to let you know, applications will still be going ahead, and they'll continue as a blend of remote and on-site audits as well, so you can still apply. It may just be slightly different from what we used to see when it used to be an on-site visit. It's going to be a mixture of a remote assessment and on-site visits. In terms of people that have assessments coming up, I'm just going to read out what it says here. Contact those. So AEs will contact those that are due an assessment between now and the 2nd of December to ensure that the contractor is happy for the assessment to continue and that the sites, where relevant, are accessible and meet the social distancing and health and safety guidelines. All half-a-day periodic assessments will now be undertaken remotely. So if you're in for a half-a-day assessment, it will be undertaken remotely. Larger contractors with extended assessments will have a blend of on-site and the virtual ones.
So that just to emphasise, Jake, that half-day assessment, that's where they're talking about periodic assessment, your surveillance assessment. So that's if you're already registered.
Yeah.
If you were applying for a domestic installer or Alexa assessment, which would typically be half a day, then those would need to be, a portion of those will need to be face-to-face site assessments.
Yeah.
So those are the things. If you can arrange that, perhaps it's a new build and there are no tenants involved, then that's fine. That can perhaps still be done with all the social distancing requirements maintained. But if it's a case where perhaps now your customers won't be too keen on having two individuals in the house now, yourself and an assessor, then let us know, talk to us, because we're not going to penalise people because of the current situation. So if they have to be postponed, we will postpone them. But yeah, as Jake says, if you're due for an assessment, then your assessor will contact you to explain if it's going to go ahead, how it's going to go ahead. But yeah, we'll talk to you definitely.
Yeah, and just to follow on from that as well, Sam, as well, it says contractors will not be charged if they cancel a visit during this period. So if you're a little bit worried and you don't think that you can make it, or you're shielding, for example, so you can't undertake the assessment, you can cancel it in that period, and there will be no charge for it. Somebody else has asked as well, are courses still going ahead? I have some information on that as well. Face-to-face training will be suspended for the next 4 weeks, and then it will be reviewed in line with the government advice. Virtual courses will continue, so if you are booked in for a virtual course, you can still carry on with that as well. So yes and no. So face-to-face ones are being postponed for a further 4 weeks. Virtual training courses will be going ahead. So hopefully that's answered your question, Mike, and hopefully you've booked on to one of the virtual ones. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon on there as well. Last question then before we start wrapping things up, Sam. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, keep your eyes on the websites, because these things are changing daily. There was a massive change on Saturday, and I think there could still be some smaller changes and ripples between now and Thursday while they iron things out. So yeah, I think on these Monday nights and Wednesday nights we'll keep you as updated as possible, but also keep an eye on the website and social media as well.
Yeah, and definitely emails as well, because I know we'll be sending out some information on there. Last question then before we start wrapping things up. Domestic metal garden shed with lighting and power. Would this require an earth rod if on TNCS? We get this question all the time, Sam. We we cannot stress this question enough, and there's so many different variations, and it's not just a one solution to fit all.
I think you've got to. It will boil down very much to the fact that, so if it's a metal shed, so it's a metal construction shed, and you've got an electrical installation within that metal construction shed. If you've got, metal fittings, metal accessories which are fixed to the metal shed, and those metal accessories and things need to be earthed, then that means your metal shed is going to be at the same potential as your PME TNCS earthing system. Now, what we don't want is for you to get 50,000 telephone calls in the first week of finishing that installation by the homeowners saying that every time they walk past to touch their nice new shed, they get a tingle. And that tingle is because they're at true earth, because they're barefoot on the wet grass, and your metal shed is at TNCS earthing potential. And that may only be 10, 20, 30 volts, so not potentially harmful, but it will be enough for them to be susceptible. So their body resistance will feel that voltage difference. And you'll get phone calls of, we're getting electric shocks. It's not actually an electric shock of a harmful potential, but as I say, it could easily be susceptible. So in those instances where we say you can't prevent people from feeling those two different potentials, one by being stood on true earth and the second by being able to touch TNCS earth, then we would suggest that you TT the outbuilding to remove that potential. There's nothing in the regs that says you have to. There's nothing in the regs that says outbuildings have to be TT'd. And so, for example, if it was a wooden structure and you didn't export the installation outside, so you had no outside lights, you had no outside sockets, then we would suggest it would be the reverse. It'd be quite acceptable to export TNCS out to the outbuilding, because you're then creating an equipotential zone within the outbuilding, and you've got no way of introducing another potential from outside. So yeah, if it's metal, or if you've got class 1 lights on the outside, or if you've got a metal socket on the outside, just to remove that potential from people stood on the ground, barefoot, wet ground, on true earth, and being able to simultaneously touch TNCS or PME earth potential, then we'd suggest removing that possibility by TTing the installation. But there's nothing that says you have to, but our advice would be to strongly consider it.
Fantastic stuff. Right, you've had us for around about 35 or so minutes now. We're going to start wrapping things up. We've got a webinar on Wednesday. It's going to be another coding one, so if you do want to jump in there, please be aware that you will probably get an email about it, or you can check out the social media platforms, and that way you can sign up through there. It is on a different platform. It's not on your socials. It's on a different platform, so please be aware of that as well. It's going to be me and you, Sam. We're going to be carrying out that one.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So
this is our week.
This is our week, yeah. There's only going to be a few images. We're not going to do too many. We're going to take a lot of questions, hopefully, from you guys, more on coding. Some people, the reason why we're moving over to that platform is because some people don't have social media, so sometimes they like to go onto that platform as well. So hopefully we'll see some of your faces and names pop up in there as well. But from myself, Sam, and everybody at NIC, EIC and Alexa, that's it for this evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon. So take care. Good night.
Bye.